Some of you already know this about me, but for those of you who don't, before I joined FRS as your ministerial intern, my previous career was actually as a sailor and as an officer in the Merchant Marine. Specifically, I worked as a deckhand and later on as a mate on board various tall ships on both the east and west coasts of the United States. Tall ships, for those of you who aren't familiar with that term, those are traditionally rigged sailing vessels, usually replicas with rigging designs that date from the 17th to the 20th centuries. I'll admit to you today that the transition from sailor to seminarian has sometimes been a little peculiar. For instance, there is little overlap as to what is considered appropriate vocabulary on the quarterdeck to behind the pulpit. But being welcomed into this community here in Newburyport has made that transition much smoother. I was delighted to learn from my first day here onwards that the maritime blood of Newburyport is still alive and flowing. And when my history of tall ship sailing does come up in conversation here, where else would parishioners respond, schooners are fully rigged ships? Where else would I learn while having a cup of coffee with a congregant that she is in fact the author of a book titled The ABCs of Newburyport Maritime History, a book which I am very excited to read to my son, by the way. And where else would I be made to promise on no fewer than 3 separate occasions that I would reference my seafaring experiences in a sermon at some point during my time here? I am happy to say that today I am keeping those promises. I am honored to be able to share with you the first and most important lesson that I learned when I was a very seasick greenhorn out on a ship in the Pacific. Our theme this month is wholeness. And I've learned no better lesson on wholeness than this. Sailors look up. So what does that mean? To be honest with you, I didn't know the first time I heard it. I had asked my first mate on the ship I was serving on, how do you tell the difference between old salts, experienced sailors, and new people like myself? And she said to me very simply, sailors look up. It took me several years to appreciate just how much wisdom is contained in those 3 short words. When that mate told me, sailors look up, she was offering me a crucial piece of insight that I would spend the next 7 years learning how to really appreciate. She was telling me this: the ship is constantly talking to you. A sailor is simply a person who has learned how to listen. You see, when a sailor is looking up, they're not looking at the clouds or getting lost in thought. They're looking and seeing how the foresail is filling and luffing in the wind. They're seeing how the lines, the ropes ease and strain in the seaway, and they're seeing how the wind has slowly clocked a few degrees east over the past hour. When a sailor looks up, they're engaged in the act of listening to their ship and in preparing to respond. The ship tells us what it needs. And the first step in becoming a sailor is simply gaining fluency in that language, that quiet language of wind and rope and wood. It took me time to appreciate the expansiveness of what it means to really listen to your ship, to really look up. The first step, of course, as I've mentioned, was practical, learning how to perceive that subtle shift in the wind that tells me those braces are going to need to be hauled, learning how to feel each and every rope in my hand as I climb aloft in the rigging and feeling for weakness or brittleness that signals needed repairs. But there's a second step in understanding sailors look up. That one took me a lot longer to learn. The second step is learning that caring for the ship doesn't just mean caring for the sails and the ropes and the wood. The second step is learning that to care for the ship, I must care for the crew and for myself. Ship, shipmate, self. All three of these are just elements and facets on the same brilliant diamond, and to care for one of them is to care for all of them. To care for the ship is to care for the crew. To care for the crew is to care for myself. To care for myself is to care for the ship, and so on and so forth. Working on a ship, you learn very quickly, the work never seems to stop. Some days I might care for my ship by noticing a spot of rust or a rotten piece of wood that needs attending to. But other days, I can care for my ship by noticing that a crewmate is feeling dejected and just needs someone to talk to about it. And there are days where the call for compassion is coming from within myself. On these days, I can best care for my ship by realizing it is okay to rest. By knowing that it is okay to ask for help from my ship and from my crew. Wholeness is cultivating an understanding that salvation is not a solo sport. It comes from giving and receiving compassion from ourselves and from others. And it comes from knowing there is always work to be done, but that doesn't mean there's no time to rest. Recently, a friend posed to me the following question: what if this is heaven? What if this right here is paradise? That question really stuck with me, like a fly getting tangled up in a spider web. It stayed in my chest for quite a while. As Unitarian Universalists, we do not follow a creed or adhere to any dogma that either confirms or denies the presence of a life or a world that follows this one. We do not claim certainty of knowledge on whether there is a kingdom holier or more wonderful than this earth that waits for us beyond the veil. What we do know is this: the world that we have right here and right now is sacred. It is sacred because it is ours to care for and because it cares for us. This world is not perfect, but it's the one we've got. And it doesn't need to be perfect to be paradise. Paradise is not a place. It is a process. Even when there is suffering, even when there is doubt, and even when there is fear, whenever we engage in the act of caring for our neighbors, we are making this world into paradise. And when we allow ourselves to rest and to ask for help and to let our hurt be tended to by others, that too is making this world into paradise. Caring for our world, our neighbors, and ourselves, that's what it means to look up. It was in thinking about my time on ships that led me to this conclusion. You see, not one of the ships I've worked on has ever been completed. I doubt there's actually a ship out there that's been floating for longer than a week that doesn't have something on it that requires mending, replacing, fixing, or at the very least, a healthy application of duct tape. And yet, when you're out on the water, your ship, incomplete maintenance list and all, is all you've got. And as long as you have a crew of sailors that know how to look up, that ship is enough. 2 years ago, I was sailing south along the Delaware coast on a ship called the Kalmar Nickel out of Wilmington, Delaware. During my watch, at nighttime, the captain and I noticed a storm developing on the horizon. We took a look at the radar, and yes, it confirmed our fears. This thing that was forming right on top of us what is called in meteorology a training storm. A training storm is a storm that develops, and then as it moves out of the way, another storm develops and moves, and another one, until you have a conga line, or a train, if you will, of storms, of big, angry, red blobs on your radar bearing down on you. At this point, we knew that this series of storms was going to be on top of us regardless of what we did. Unfortunately, this is as much a part of sailing as it is a part of life. You can plan all you want, but if you leave your harbor often enough, you're going to get knocked about by some storms. And knocked about we most certainly were. It was a really humbling experience. Water rushed over the deck and the sky lit up. The ship was being pushed one way by the foamy sea and pulled another by the wind. The air was saturated with rain and with spray, and everyone on that ship was soaked to the bone. As we yawed and pitched and surged and rolled in that storm, I realized that even only 20 to 30 miles away from the shore, right now, this ship is my whole world. But I also realized that every little thing I had been doing on this little world over the past year, all the painting and scraping, replacing, patching, teaching, and training, was being repaid in full. The crew had protected their ship, and now their ship would protect them. The Kalmar Nickel is not a 1,000-foot, 20,000-ton cargo ship. She's 160 feet long, 200 to 300 tons, crew of about 24 people, so mid-size. But out there, she was all we had, and she proved she was enough. I learned a lot about my ship that day, and I learned about myself too. I learned that when things go sideways, it is hard to look up. It is hard to listen to your ship and know what to do when the storms are rolling in and the light fades from the horizon. I learned that day there was a lot more I needed to learn. But I also came to understand that I was far from alone up there. Without my captain on deck to help me, I would have made some bad calls. It was my watch after all. I was the one issuing orders, and in the whirling tumult of the storm, I almost sent orders down to our helmsperson steering the ship that would have resulted in our ship being brought broadside, sideways to the waves and to the storm. For those of you who don't sail, that is exactly where you don't want your ship to be. But I wasn't alone up there on the quarterdeck. I did have my captain and the other mates, and really the whole ship's crew on my side as we struggled together through it. Learning to look up isn't something we have to do by ourselves. And with the help from the ship and from all my friends, we sailed out of that storm hale and hearty with nothing but a good story to tell about it. That really wouldn't have been the case if not for two things. The first was all of the love and care that our crew had put into our ship over the years. And the second thing was all that help and all that information and wisdom and guidance given to me by my captain and my helmsperson and my bow watch and by my crew. When I was out at sea, all I had was a ship, a crew, and myself, and yet that was everything I needed, even during a storm. Wholeness is knowing that this world is enough. Wholeness is knowing that together we are enough. Wholeness is knowing beyond a shadow of a doubt that you are enough, even during the storms, because you are enough. Each and every one of you is worthy of receiving compassion, and each and every one of you is capable of giving it. You belong here, in this world, in this paradise, and all of us are made better by your presence. Together, we are already doing the work of making this world a paradise, by listening when others tell us they are hurting, by stretching the limits of our love and widening our circle to bring in those who are suffering, by owning the truth that every single one of us belongs here and that all people deserve peace and justice and love. And we also make this world paradise by caring for ourselves and by being cared for by each other, by knowing our own needs and honoring them, by being able to rest, by being able to say, I hurt and I need help, and then having our suffering seen and cared for by others. Paradise isn't a place, it's a process. Wholeness is looking up, looking out, and looking within. It is knowing that our world speaks to us all the time, telling us its pains and its needs, but we must take the time also to hear our own needs. Wholeness is knowing that you are able to hear and hold all of these needs, even, and this is critical, even if you cannot fix them. I'll close by saying that I am honored to spend this year with you as your ministerial intern. I am humbled to have learned from all of you and to have been cared for and nurtured every single day by this community. The seeds of paradise are right here, and as we move together into spring, I, for one, cannot wait to see what blossoms. Amen.